where to begin. It's not often you get a one-word answer.
Yeah,
I'm not sure she was expecting it.
No, she wasn't. But actually, it's funny. I'm not quite sure why she's asking the Prime Minister on this, because he has repeatedly said, yes, I will keep to that promise that I made in the manifesto not to increase tax, income tax, VAT, national insurance for the remainder of the Parliament.
No money back, no guarantee.
Yeah. But look, I don't quite see why she keeps asking that one. I do see why she's trying to press him on tax generally, but he has already said repeatedly that he will honour that promise. It's interesting, the contrast, though, between him saying that and him agreeing to talk about tax in that respect, but he won't talk about a wealth tax. He won't talk about whether he'll keep the income tax threshold freeze. Those are something, the latter is something that Labour promised to do before the election. They've gone very quiet about that one. It cost them a lot of money. They're saying that basically from 2028 onwards, they want to change those income tax thresholds.
But they're tax cuts, aren't they? Freezes of thresholds in real terms.
Yeah, exactly.
You're paying a smaller proportion of your income.
Exactly, and more and more people, as wages go up, and the Labour government, and you heard Keir Starmer just there talk about the fact that wages are going up. Great news, of course, but more and more people being dragged into higher and higher tax brackets. We talk about doctors, nurses, teachers being dragged into those higher tax brackets, and they're making people feel worse off over time. Fiscal drag. It's not very sexy, but it affects a lot of people, and they can't say whether they're going to
the wealth tax,
do anything about
it. They'd have ruled that out at one point, certainly in opposition. Don't be ridiculous, of course. Interesting to see the polling on it as well from YouGov yesterday. Very broad support for it. Interesting, but perhaps not surprising to hear Kemi Badenoch parroting this discredited research, claiming that there's been some sort of millionaire exodus, because that's landing well with the right. But interesting that they're not ruling that. None of them are.
I think they're keeping that as an option on the table.
They are.
Definitely. But look, what do you mean by a wealth tax? And of course, Neil Kinnock had a specific idea.
Well, she hadn't read it, because he talked about people with assets in excess of £10 million, and she said that every single one of her constituents would be affected. So
I'm not sure about that one.
Well,
how many rich millionaires are there?
Where is her constituency?
Saffron Walden.
Can we just check that everybody in Saffron Walden is worth in excess of £10 million, please? Otherwise, I'm afraid she's done another boo-boo.
Yeah, but look, the idea of a wealth tax, let's first talk about what it would mean. There are already lots of wealth taxes, inheritance tax, capital gains tax, lots of taxes already exist on the very wealthiest in society. You're right that when you, of course, poll people to say, would you like a wealth tax? Would you like the richest to pay more? Of course, people are going to say yes. But it is interesting, you're right, that this Labour government are refusing to rule that out. I think at this point, 3 or 4 months out before the budget, it's fair enough to not talk about it, not to rule anything in, not to rule anything out. But you are completely right. Before, they would have said, we're not interested in that sort of thing. In fact, the Chancellor just a few months ago in an interview with, I think it was The Telegraph, said, I am not interested in a wealth tax. But the economy not doing fantastically well. And of course, she's got a few more £1 billion to find. I think she needs to keep all options on the table. I think we're in for a long summer of what tax speculation could look like and where she might look to try and plug that hole.
Lord save us all. Did the Reform UK benches look a bit thinner than usual?
Well, they
haven't lost another MP, have they?
Sorry, is it 20% now or 40%?
40% of MPs elected at large, which, to be fair, is probably quite a good record compared to what's happened to councils. But
they did gain one extra. So where does that stand?
Yes, the chap who was incarcerated for kicking his ex-girlfriend's head in, but that wasn't enough to get him thrown out of the party, is now elected to resign from the party. To resign the whip.
I didn't realise you could resign the whip until this weekend, voluntarily, but apparently you can.
Has it ever happened before?
I'm not sure, and definitely not in the Reform Party, because they've obviously not had enough MPs to do so, but
so this is James McMurdoch, the MP for South Basildon and East Thurrock, conveniently going independent, which of course means that only he will get to decide whether or not the constituents ever get another by-election before the next general election, and he will continue to draw his salary until then. It's
tough to get rid of an MP without them being found guilty of some sort of impropriety. And he is, of course, facing an investigation currently within the party. I think the Labour Party have referred him to the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner to see whether there is a case to answer here. But yes, it could be weeks, potentially months before anything is found in his favour or against him.
Of one thing we can be certain. If there is any wrongdoing, or if it turns out to have been an appalling appointment, it will have absolutely nothing to do with the chap who leads the party.
No, definitely not. I didn't vet them.
I didn't vet them. Clean. And I believe they're lowering the standards for vetting now. They're saying to people who've previously been rejected, why don't you apply again?
For the Reform Party or for other parties?
But just for Reform, because the track record of the people who got onto the ballot is so sparkling. But we digress. The doctor strike works a bit. I think think public opinion is going to be different this time round from what it was last time round, as far as I can tell, and for good or for ill. There are points to be landed there.
Yeah, I think
she land them?
Yeah, no, because actually she didn't spend much time talking about the junior doctor strikes. But equally, I guess the government have a very strong argument in, well, we solved those junior doctor strikes. We gave them the pay rise they wanted. We are seeing an increase in NHS appointments. Waiting lists are dropping. They've got a good story to tell here. However, if these resident doctors do go on strike, it's going to erase completely their argument here, and they'll be in a real hot water about it, I think.
Which oddly works both ways, because it makes some people think, well, they shouldn't do it then, because the BMA should want a government that is more sympathetic to their cause than the alternatives. But equally, it makes them think, well, now's the time to go for them, because we can really do them damage.
Yeah,
that's the double-edged sword of industrial action, isn't it?
And it also might have a bit of a blowback on the government as well, because the BMA, the public might go, oh, are this government just the same as the last government? They're not going to be giving pay rises out. We think they deserve it. I think you're right in what you talk about public opinion. It doesn't feel like the sort of momentum is with doctors going on strike again. In fact, most of the polling shows that most people don't support them to do so again. So they might be barking up a tree, which... so I'm not sure where this analogy is going here. They might not be able to. They might not be able to.
That's very honest of you.
Yeah, they might not be able to galvanise that public support for going on strike again. So it might not work for them. But yeah, the problem is though, like I say, if they do, they risk eroding all of the progress they've made on NHS waiting lists, and that is something I think everybody can agree. The first year of this Labour government has been a huge win on the NHS. Things are finally starting to turn around a little bit there.
And he did a better job this week of pointing out some of these wins and some of this progress than he has.
He should be doing that every week. It should be his final answer every week, going, I've done this, and this. And yeah, I think he is getting a little bit better about sort of triumphing some of the wins and combating some of that negativity.
Had an important message. Hi James, we're currently in the process of buying a house in Saffron Walden and would like to confirm that we do not have £10 million in assets. However, I am planning on lowering the tone of the neighbourhood as soon as I arrive. Thank you. Well, good luck.
We also saw, we should mention the Prime Minister pulling the Liz Truss button yet again. Is that always going to be Keir Starmer's answer on the economy? Because I don't think it can be forever. I think, Kemi Badenoch does make a point here when she's saying, you have been in power for a year. Understandably, of course, you can always blame. It's going to take a long time to turn around 14 years of the Tories. Of course it will. But Keir Starmer does need to start moving on, I think, at some point from that narrative, don't you think?
I don't know.
How long is it there down to start talking about?
Well, it depends how heavily your mortgage was affected by it. If you lost your house, I don't think you'll ever get bored of hearing it be pointed out that Liz Truss was personally responsible for it, and that all the people cheerleading for Kemi Badenoch, and indeed opposed to the wealth tax, told you that Liz Truss was going to be brilliant. So you would have the Telegraph, you'd have the Sun, you'd have the Daily Mail, you'd have Nigel Farage, you'd have all of her colleagues in Parliament all claiming that this was the finest fiscal event since sliced bread. And the reason why you remind people of Liz Truss's disastrous tenure is because all of those people are still in their jobs.
Yeah, and we don't want to go back to those days.
Also, you don't want to trust them next time they tell you to do something like, I don't know, vote for Brexit, put Boris Johnson in Parliament, support austerity, or greet Liz Truss with a big round of applause and a red carpet. Just me thinking out loud that. I don't know. Maybe some people are bored of having it pointed out that a Tory Prime Minister with the full support of a parliamentary party led the government to the very edge, led the entire country to the very edge of financial oblivion. But anyway, to be fair to the Tories, it's not like they were bringing up Labour's track record at the last general election 14 years after Labour were in power.
Totally crazy, and I completely agree that to just move on, don't do it. But
and when did the Tories stop hitting the Corbyn button?
That's true. No, true. But I don't think it works, because I don't think that the
PMQs, it's not real life, is it?
True, but I don't think that the Prime Minister has got enough of a sound economic argument, ideology, credibility to be saying, look, the economy is under so much better since we took over. We've stabilised the public finances. People don't feel better off, and until they start to, I think that it is going to continue to be a bit of an Achilles heel for the Prime Minister on the economy. Keir Starmer's not really a numbers economist guy, is he? He's leaving most of it to Rachel Reeves to sort out, and at the moment it's not going fantastically well.
And one thing we can say with supreme confidence is that Rachel Reeves ain't going anywhere anytime soon.
Absolutely not. Well, you saw the reaction to the idea that Keir Starmer didn't fully back her at last week's Prime Minister's Questions when he had the opportunity to, soon rowing completely back on that. But yeah, she ain't going anywhere.
Natasha Clark, many thanks. We haven't talked about Ed Davey at all.
His good questions on Send,
yes.
And that's something.
Why did everyone start jeering? Was that because he was in government for some of the period?
Were they jeering him out when he was talking about small boats, or were they jeering
on
Send? I'm not sure what exactly he said that prompted that.
I presume because he was in the coalition government, so he doesn't really get to. I don't know, but it's all a lot of rear-view mirror at PMQs, isn't there? Perhaps inevitably, perhaps a bit too much.
But yeah, he's talked today about the government. He's basically saying that we will vote for send reform if he's set out 5 ways that Liberal Democrats would like to see that reform. I think that's occupying a lot of MPs' postbags at the moment. But even Ed Davey, we didn't mention this point. Even Ed Davey says that the money being spent on small boat crossings in France is not enough, which I thought was a really interesting move from him.
Yeah, I thought that as well, and we should have left aside a bit more time to talk about it.
Next time we'll talk about Ed Davey we should talk about him for 10 minutes and Kemi Badenoch for 5.